Welcome to the call. Welcome, Carson.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining.
All right, then I will do a quick, before we jump into the n8n stuff, I'll do a quick recap of what we've done since last time. So let's go ahead and get started. My name's Alex Kim. I'm an n8n ambassador, as well as a partner. I'm also founder at Watt AI, where we are building a n8n powered marketing automation system. And last time we went over the application portion of this demo app, which is a goal tracker, and we got all the tech stack set up, things like GitHub, Vercel, Supabase, which is our database storage and authentication platform. We also prepared Claude Code, which is Anthropic's coding toolkit, if you will. And we are also set up with Microsoft Visual Studio Code, which is our development environment. So we have all that set up. And last time we were able to actually publish the demo app. This is just a static version of the goal app. But since our last call, I did spend a little bit of time actually implementing the authentication as well as some of the actual goals. So if you guys can see here, right now with Supabase, I could actually sign into this application and we can add goals based on different categories that we have here. If I say personal, let's map that under health. So this actually will add a new goal to this system. And what this does now is add that goal. If I refresh this on the back end, you can see here in our Supabase database interface, we now have finish a marathon as one of the goals. So this is, again, from our last call to today's call, I actually did get the app working. You guys can see. And today what we wanted to do was go over what n8n is, first and foremost, as a automation platform, and then actually build some workflows that we can connect to the goal app so that when we're here and certain actions happen, it's actually going to send that request to n8n, have it process a workflow, and then come back. But before we get into that, let's first talk about what is n8n. n8n is basically a workflow automation platform. If you've heard of platforms like Zapier or Make.com, n8n is a similar platform. I also went through that process of doing a lot of work in Zapier and then Make.com and then ended up in n8n because it is a lot more flexible. If you happen to be more technical, you could actually leverage that capability and bring a lot more functionality into your workflows. Or if you aren't technical, you can just use the visual builder and build quite complex capabilities, as I can demo for or show you guys some of the things I've built. And the other thing is, early in the development of n8n, they decided to bring AI capabilities, right? So some of their competitors are pulling in AI capabilities, but n8n was built from the ground up with AI in mind. And it's truly shows when you're actually working in n8n and trying to build some AI agents, which again, we'll go through that today during this call. So the other thing is that because n8n is open source, you can actually self-host this without having to buy their cloud instance, right? So for $20 or $25, you can get their cloud version, which makes it really easy. You don't have to deal with any servers and self-hosting and things like that. But if you are more technical and able to, you can launch this on a fairly robust server on, let's say, Hetzner or on Hostinger or any of those VPS service providers, and really have n8n ready to go with a single click. So I self-host everything, and that's why I mention it. But I think this audience here may just offer the cloud version, which if you go to the cloud version, which this is the cloud version, you have on a monthly basis up to 10,000 executions. And n8n considers a single execution the entire workflow, not the number of nodes inside a workflow. So let's say your workflow has 100 nodes or little boxes, as you will see, it doesn't count those 100. It counts that full execution as one execution. And again, you get 10,000 of those on a monthly basis. And that's only successful executions, not failed executions. So if you're developing and you have a lot of failed executions during that development cycle, none of those count towards that limit. Okay, so this is the n8n interface. And if I go to the overview page, you can see here, I've got a bunch of workflows. I've got credentials, which are used to connect to third-party systems, let's say like Airtable, Anthropic, WordPress, etc. There's, I think, over 1,500 or something different apps you can connect to from within n8n. So those are the credentials you need to connect to those third-party applications. This is the list of executions. And now recently they introduced the concept of data tables, which means that you no longer even need to have, let's say, a separate database in some instances as you're building these things out. Essentially, there is now a built-in smaller database as you're building things, and then as it scales up, you can now you can integrate with an actual database, or if you're more comfortable with, say, something like Airtable, you would connect with that. So that's the n8n interface. And if I go in here, let's start with our let's start with one of the workflows I think we want to build for our goal tracking app, which is having a workflow suggest some AI developed goals into our interface, right? So here, maybe there's a little notification like underneath here that says, hey, based on some analysis or some data input of who you are, that the AI agent will now suggest something. So one of the cool features that n8n recently released, like literally last week, is you can actually give the AI tool here your workflow idea and see if it can actually build it for you. So if I go to, where is it? If I go here, and actually that's not the right one. Let me see. I had a workflow description for this somewhere. Let me see. Give me a second. All right, I didn't really have it. So let's do this. I am in Microsoft Visual Studio Code, which is where we are developing the code base for this goal tracking application. And I have Claude Code already open. So let's see if it can give me a product or workflow description for our AI goal suggestion workflow, right? Let's help me craft a mini PRD for an n8n workflow that will generate goal suggestions based on the user profile. Okay, consider our current map. Consider our current code base and include the payload that needs to be sent to n8n workflow. Okay, post to. All right, so the way we're going to interact with the workflow in n8n is the use of webhooks. And if you aren't familiar with what a webhook is, essentially it's a mechanism to receive some sort of a HTTP request. It's a web address of some sort, right? So this workflow that we're going to create will have a webhook address, a URL that our app can call and say, hey, this is the information I'm sending to you. Do something with this information, right? And in our case, it might be the user's profile and some very basic information about that user, so that this workflow can say, hey, great, I received the information about John, and we're going to go ahead and process this in this workflow, and then I'll send you back whatever that output looks like, right? So we'll do that, have a webhook that we can post to, and all right, let's see what this comes up with. So what I want to do is now, because Claude knows what our code base or our app is doing, it's going to help me sort of put the right description together for this workflow. And then I'm going to bring it into this AI, because now this AI has all the knowledge about all the various nodes that are in n8n and the various functionalities, right? So what I keep using the word or the term node, and what that means is, let's say it's this little trigger here where I can manually start a workflow. And then if I say, hey, I want an AI agent, right? Then what this is going to do, I'm going to delete this because we're not going to do a chat AI agent. But right here, what you're looking at is now 2 nodes inside of n8n. So each of these little boxes that you create in a workflow are called nodes, right? Let's see, this is not done yet. So that is what the terminology in n8n. And as I was saying, when they made the decision to go AI native as they're building their product, this little AI agent, even though it's 1 node, is incredibly powerful, okay? I can choose my model that I want to use. And typically these days I'm using more and more of Anthropic, and we'll choose Sonnet 4.5, which is their latest. And I want to make sure I have the right credential selected when I'm choosing this model. So we have the model, and for this product or project, we don't need to hold these messages back and forth with the AI agent or the LLM. We don't need to hold that in memory. You can add, let's say, a vector database to this AI agent, but that's not our use case at this time. So the other thing you can do is add a variety of different tools. So for example, if you have, let's say, an MCP server that you wanted this AI agent to interact with, you can add that. Or if it's a custom API endpoint that you need this workflow to interact with, you would use a HTTP call. You can call other workflows, and you can see here, you can call a variety of vector stores now. This list is growing longer and longer, almost every implementation that they're or update that they're pulling out. And then also all of these other tools, depending on what platform you might be using. I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's quite a long list, okay? And then in addition to the tools, you have access to this part, which is sort of the original way to interact within the workflow. So again, this thing is also growing pretty much every week. And as you can see, you have some common tools like AWS, and you've got other tools like Box, Dropbox, Calendly. So whatever third-party application you need data to go to and from, it's especially if it's one of the more common tool or third-party apps, it's most likely going to be available as a built-in node within n8n. If it isn't available, you would just call to that API using an HTTP request. And there's a bunch of different methods you will use. And if you aren't familiar with what a HTTP request method is, it's just a way of identifying, is it a pull of information? Is it a push of information? And things like patch are updating information, and obviously delete here as well. All right, so those are some of the basics of how to build a workflow. But let's see if Claude is done doing its little mini PRD. It's still going. Let's see, I think it went through the code base to understand what the app is currently doing, and so that it has a more thorough way. The result of this mini PRD for the workflow should be much more aligned with what the code base currently is, right? And so the other thing I want to show you guys, I don't know if we were doing this last time, but the way I organize sort of my working process within Claude Code is I typically organize the documentation by the day I'm working with this code base, right? So as you can see here, the 16th and the 21st. And so for example, when I was getting the app actually built in terms of the functionality, so this piece here where I implemented the email password sign up in Supabase, and then also made some updates to be able to either complete or archive a goal, and also identify what category of goal I am creating, right? So on the first pass of this app, there was no category. Although I could filter by category, there was no way to actually create a goal with a category. So what I did was I had Claude prepare an implementation plan. And as you guys can see here, we have a lot of completed items, but basically I wanted it to update our code base so that we have a working interface, we have a working authentication mechanism within Supabase with email password. It also updated the database and the table. So as you saw earlier, we have a table for the goals in the database, and it's going to continue to update itself as we're creating these goals, right? So that was done. And yeah, and so some of the other things I did was that category selector and things like that. And so what I typically do is when I begin a working session, I work within Claude Code to build a plan for whatever function I'm building and have it document that plan so that I have a record of it. And as I'm working through things, I can always refer back to it and have Claude Code also refer back to it, because you might get disconnected, it might lose context, it might run out of memory in that session in terms of the context window that you work with. And so as you're working with these AI-based code tools, there's a certain amount of memory per session, not per session, there's a certain amount of memory, and when it uses up that memory, it has to compact that memory and sort of reset its memory load, right? And so when it does that, it can lose context as to what it was working on. That's why you want to, as you're beginning that working session, you want to have it documented, not only for yourself, but also for the LLM. And now it can always refer back to, well, in this session, we were working on these features and we were this far along in that process, right? So you guys can see here, I have green check marks all the way across because as it's finishing things up, I am having it update this document as a live document as I'm working on new functionality. All right, so let's go back to this mini PRD and let's see what it came up with. Okay, this ended up being quite long. So let me go all the way up to the top. All right. Let's see, mini PRD, okay. n8n workflow, yes, okay. User story, wow. This ended up being a lot more complex than I thought it was going to be, but the more detail, the better. All right. So what you guys are seeing here is the JSON that will be sent to the workflow, right? The n8n workflow, so that it knows I'm dealing with this information, and then we're going to build the workflow so that it can actually work with this information, right? So payload field definitions. Okay, great. Workflow steps. It thought through quite a lot of stuff. Let's see. Okay. Probably a lot more technical detail that you guys might not be able to understand here, but let me get through the bottom here. Okay, let's go ahead and create this document. And typically in Claude Code, I just let it create the files and make the edits on auto mode in a way. In like, as you guys are seeing, I'm about to select yes, allow all edits during this session, because otherwise it's going to ask you every single time like this, like, do you want me to create this document? Do you want me to make these edits? For the most part, I usually allow it to do that. So, all right, so we have this document now for the n8n workflow. What I want to do, quite long. I'm not sure if I can. Okay, we don't need to deal with the UI component. This is more for the app itself. All right, so I want the workflow description, which should be at the top. It prepared all the nodes as well. So I want up to here. We'll copy this. Okay, so going through this document that it prepared, the mini PRD, I can see that we've got the user story, the workflow trigger, right? The webhook address that it's going to call. And this is the information that the goal app is sending to n8n. And here's further detail, but this is really where I think n8n is going to use this information to build the various nodes. Is that Claude Code has actually identified all the nodes that it should build. And so let's see. So I'm going to copy this and let's go into our AI builder. And keep in mind, guys, that I haven't used this AI builder like too much. So we are sort of experimenting with this together. I'm going to delete all of this so that let's go ahead and paste this in and see what happens. Okay, we have a 5,000 character limit, of course. Let me see. Okay, so got rid of that last JSON. Okay, let's see what this does. All right. Typically, I would hand build these workflows, but let's see if this tool will help you guys also build much faster and with the right sort of nodes in place, okay? So this AI builder is only available on the cloud accounts at this time. They have not rolled it out to the self-hosting versions yet. So that's why you can see here, this URL is for my cloud account, n8n cloud account, and not my self-hosted. So it's going through, yeah, so it's searched the nodes, getting all the nodes based on the details, right? So this trigger is the right trigger. I wanted to be able to receive that request from our goal app. And then also you can see here, this is sort of the workflow structure I typically create, which is this configuration node or a settings node, right? So that all your application variables for this workflow are going to be captured at the very beginning. And that information and that reference node will be called upon throughout the rest of this workflow. So let's see. Doesn't match the input payload. Okay. Yep. So it's now also looking at the payload information, right? This payload info was done on purpose because otherwise, this workflow, if you just start to, let's say, build it without understanding what the application is sending and expecting back in the current data model that we're working in, then you're going to spend a lot more time figuring out how to structure this workflow to send the right data, to receive and send the right data, right? And so that's why when I initially requested this, I want to make sure that I'm including the data model component, which is a payload. I use the term payload here. So that's in reference to the data model being used by your app that you're currently building, right? So make sure you include that as you're figuring out these various components or features that you're trying to build out. Let's see what it has completed. Okay, so goal suggestions, great. I don't need a authentication. That's enough. So you can secure your webhook by adding some sort of security here or authentication, but I typically do that by using a CORS. If you guys aren't familiar what this is, it means that right now it allows any URL to call upon this webhook address, but I can limit it to, let's say, our goal application or goal tracking app URL, right? So, which is, I think, yeah. So this is a URL that the live app will be at. So if I wanted to limit access to this, I can just add that URL to this. So you don't need any authentication. Basically, you're saying only allow this domain or this IP to access this workflow. All right, so we will use a responsive. Great. So this is pretty basic. It's just setting up the URL to receive that request. And then let's take a look at this. Okay, maximum suggestions, default suggestion count. All right, we'll leave that as that. So it added a code node into this request because it's doing a lot of data processing and parsing, okay? I won't go through this in completion here because I can kind of see what it's doing, and it's added its own comments, but we'll leave that there for now. Build AI prompt, okay. All right. So it's using another code node to build the prompt. We'll change the model because, again, I prefer to use Anthropic. Go with 4.5. So this is another reason why I would use n8n for building out some of these MVP level functionalities, because you can build a lot of functions without having to hard code this, right? So rather than being at the code level in Next.js, which is what this app is using, right, where we're building out function by function, I can model this out, figure out some of the quirks of the function, and then also maybe experiment with different models, right? So for example, one of the new capabilities that the AI agents now have is I can actually enable a fallback model. So if Anthropic didn't work, then I can actually go ahead and pick OpenAI to see if that backup model might work. And obviously, we're going to use GPT-5, which is their latest and greatest. So you can actually have two different models that are ready to use, right? So that's a new feature that's come in. But a lot of experimentation can happen, especially as you're building new functions out for whatever app you're building. The other thing here that it added, and we'll look at the prompts within this AI agent in a minute here, but the other thing is that you can require very specific outputs from your AI or LLM, right? Why is that important? Let's go back to the idea that we're sending a certain data model to the workflow, and we're also expecting a certain data model to come back from the execution of this workflow. And that's where the structured output parser comes in. And if I open this up, you guys can see here this JSON format is going to map to this data model that the PRD is suggesting. So everything maps there, and that's what we want, so that when we look at the prompts, okay, so the prompt is being dynamically built, so I don't see it here. I would also use a system message here. So in addition to this prompt, we'll probably want to massage this system message so that our output is a little bit more in line with the final output that we're expecting. All right, so let's look at this final one. So what's happening here is when this webhook is called from the app, because this respond to webhook node is at the very end, this entire workflow has to be completed. Otherwise, there will be no feedback, right? So I'll leave that as is, but probably for a production level app, I might do a few different things. If I can show you guys a quick example of what that might look like. This is a workflow for one of the features in the Watt AI app. And as you can see here, we have a very similar structure where we have a webhook being called. But in my case, what I'm doing is I'm actually responding to it right away. I'm saying, so the app called this webhook, and I'm responding to it right away and saying, hey, I received your request. Here is some additional information to validate your request. And then what I do is, because I have an API endpoint for the app to receive information from this workflow, as this workflow is progressing, I have several HTTP calls. It's about 25% each stage, right? So right here, as it hits this node and completes, it's going to hit that API endpoint and say, hey, I'm 25% of the way there. This is 50% of the way there, 75, and so on. And at the very end, it's going to send back the entire payload or data from this workflow to that API endpoint. So a little bit of a different way to approach what that workflow and the webhook might do, but let's leave things as is in our instance. And what I want to do is I want to get this test webhook, and I want to say, let's send a test payload to the following URL. Okay, so the PRD is in place. Claude Code knows what we're trying to do. And what I want to do is I want to get a sample payload so that I can actually work with the workflow. And you'll see what I mean by that. So I want to listen now for a test event. So this URL, this webhook address is now actively looking for some sort of data to come in. And let's have Claude Code to send an example payload so we can capture that, so we can now see how the workflow will perform and what kind of information it can generate. Let's see if that works. If you guys aren't aware, you can actually add auto approve certain commands, and that'll add it to the settings for Claude Code for this project only. So they'll do that. I don't have to approve curl commands going forward for this project. Let's see if it, okay, great. So we got the sample payload here from Claude Code. If you guys aren't familiar with what a curl command is, it's basically a single instance webhook call or any URL, and it can construct that curl command to include the payload. And that's exactly what has happened here. So I'm going to pin this data in n8n. And when I pin it, that means that now, before we go into the actual data, now you can see this has got a purple outline. And now I don't have to do another call to this webhook so that I can have a example payload and it's always there until I unpin it, okay? So I don't care about the header information, but I do want to see, we've had the user data, we have the metadata categories. Okay, great. So existing goals. It's quite a lot of information that it's being sent. Okay, so we have that information ready. So there isn't anything being captured here. Yep. So the other thing it did when it created this is called a edit or set node. This is you see this edit fields set node. That's what this is, and it's used quite often to capture outputs from the previous nodes so that you can reference back to that information that's generated, right? So what it did was it created the manual fields, but it's also including all other fields. So everything here from that trigger data will be now sent forward to the rest of the workflow, right? So I'm going to manually execute this, means, okay, we captured this data. So now you see here all the webhook information because this was turned on. Now let's run this, see what it does. Okay, now we have an error. User ID is required. It looks like a valid UUID. Why is it throwing an error? Okay, so what I would do in this instance is I would take this entire JSON and I would do, say, here is JSON n8n. Paste that in, an error in the code node. And let's copy this code error here and see if it can figure out what the problem is. And this is code node. And let's give it this as well. All right. So this is quite typical when I'm trying to troubleshoot, especially code nodes like this. Just give it to Claude and let it fix itself. It'll understand all the nuances a lot better than me trying to figure out what I might have missed. Let's have it think through. Okay, so there we go. Here's a correct. You see, this is the beauty of this. So it's now fixed the code node for me. And let's come back here, paste that in, and execute this step. Now we have a green box. It's validated the input and we have our output here. Okay, so next we'll go to this and we may run into some issues here as well, but let's see. Nope, that one worked. All right, so we have our prompt here. So what's happened now is we have the user information from that example payload. It's validated it and it constructed a prompt, right, based on the user information. So if I go to our schema, we have our prompt, and you guys can see here, because we dynamically generated the prompt, it's going to put that prompt into this user message, and let's delete this system message for now, and let's see what this AI does. So I will execute. Let me go back out. Let's execute this, see what the output looks like. While that's doing that, this respond to webhook is not going to work at this time, right? Because we don't have this code on our Vercel servers yet. And so because n8n is on a external website, external domain, there's no live URL to send this back to, unfortunately. So I will have to just manually copy it, most likely, and put it into this Claude Code interface so that I can have our app make the changes to the code base to work with the output from the workflow. Does that make sense? So let's see, obviously we didn't have to go to the fallback model. We have a structured output, and let's see what that looks like. All right, so we have how many goal suggestions? 1, 2, 3, okay, 5 goal suggestions, which is based on this configuration here. So if we wanted to increase or reduce that, we just need to change this number, and this output will change accordingly, okay? And that's why we have this type of configuration here, so that it's not hard-coded into this. All right, create a full stack TypeScript project, milestones. Okay, this went a little bit more complex than what we currently have in the app because it's just one item here, right? It only accepts one line of data, but this looks pretty good in terms of what a goal should look like. So let's see. It's got the duration, goal number 2. Cool. Okay, so the output looks good as a initial item. Let's see what the response. Yeah, this was just a generic respond to. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to take this output JSON in its entirety, and let's have Claude Code update this. Okay. So let me see. I'm going to create a new folder, suggestions. So right now, you guys can see here, this is accept edits on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to plan mode. And so in Claude Code, when it is in plan mode, it's going to think about your request and put together a plan. And this is where, you know, this type of implementation plan is created. When I'm working in plan mode, it's going to think through it step by step, understand your code base, and help you to see what it's going to do and give you a chance to make changes as you're building this out. So, okay, suggestion. Okay, so that is a JSON payload of those goals, right? The plan it's to the app based on this data. All right, and then put new plan in /doc/ what's it? 25/10/21, today's date, and goal suggestions. So I typically put them into subfolders based on the functionality so that, again, it's easier to reference. So let's see what it does with that request. So the other thing that is very new to Claude Code is the idea where, I don't know if you guys have done this with regular Claude and ChatGPT, but when you make a request, you tend to ask the LLM to provide you clarifying questions, right? So now, as you guys can see here, Claude Code has that built in where based on your request, it's going to put together a set of clarifying questions so that it, again, completes the task based on what you're actually looking to do. So let's see, shall we transform the n8n in the server action to match the real or update the entire app? Let's update the entire app because this is a more complex output. So we'll update the app, then it'll go say auto calculate. What should we calculate? It will auto calculate for now. Should we display mouses or in a collapsible checklist? Yes. Yes, update the PRD as well. Great. So that feature, like, that was not there before. It's just showed up, I think, maybe a week or 2 weeks ago, and it was a very nice surprise to see that happening because you no longer have to prompt for those clarifying questions, and that's another reason why I pushed to build this out in Claude Code, because as you guys saw, the fact that you can now create custom agents inside of Claude Code as well, not just for coding but other things you may do, it's quite useful, and hopefully you guys spend more time in it and understand really the true power of what you're with here. All right, let's look at the plan here. Update the app to match the actual. Okay, so it's gonna make the suggestions. Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and let it proceed with this plan, and it should now create a new plan document here. So right now, basically our workflow is ready to go. Okay, so this goal suggestion builder is done. And if I do a few more things here, we want to set this to active. Okay, and the reason you do that is because that will turn this production URL live, right? So now this workflow is open to the internet. This URL for the webhook should output the goal suggestions. So if you made a curl command call to this, you actually will get something back, which is what you saw earlier. So I'm going to unpin this data, or actually no, let's leave that. The app isn't ready. Right now, if someone does send it, it'll just use this pin data that's already captured in this node, right? The sample data that the Claude Code sent. When you go to production, you don't want to have any nodes that are pinned so that you clear the slate here. All right, so we have one workflow done. The other thing I typically do is go into the settings area here, and you want to make sure that this is set to V1. I have a error workflow already in place, and what that means is that if this workflow errors out, it's going to send me a notification. Okay, so for this app, you probably want to have a custom or a duplicate of this error handler, because your app will have a API address, right? You saw in my other example where I'm sending back information from the workflow to the app via an API address, and that API address should also handle error notifications, so that I will want a error handler just for this app with that specific URL. So if I save this, now anytime that any of these executions error out, I will get in my case, this will send it to a Discord channel that I have set up. So I have a Discord channel that receives all my n8n errors. So I know when things go wrong. If I go to, oops, let me save this real quick while this is working. It's asking to grab some UI components from ShadCN. Let's let it do that. So this is going to keep working. So I'll come back to this while we're still talking about the n8n stuff, all right? So if I go to my utilities, I can see here I have my error handler. If I go to my error handler, again, right now it's only going to send a Discord message, but if I made a duplicate of this, I want to have a HTTP call to a post. I want to send it to let's do this. So I want to send it to my API endpoint that's going to receive that error notification for that app. The other thing that all of your n8n instances should have, while we're waiting for this to finish, is some sort of a backup mechanism, okay? At the end of the day, all of these workflows are JSON files. And right now I have a workflow that backs up all my n8n instances and all those workflows to a GitHub repo for each of those instances, okay? This workflow here is not something I created. If you guys go to n8n.io/workflows, oh my gosh, I can't spell. Workflows. All right. Now they're over. Oh, wow. This is growing so fast. I think just last week, this was like 5,000 something. So there are over 6,000 example workflows for you to pick from. It's categorized. You can go to, let's say, AI, which is obviously a very popular section. All of these workflows, I think probably 95% of them are free workflows. If you go here, these are all available for you to use for free. And so what I was saying is, if I came here and did a search for GitHub, you'll see there are a lot of backup workflows. And this is exactly what this workflow is. I customize it just slightly, but you don't need to do that. There are instructions within a lot of these workflows. And so you just need to pick a backup workflow that's available for free. And the way you would implement it is, if I go in here, you say use for free, and I can import this template straight into my cloud workspace account, or any of these, any of my other n8n instances. As you guys can see, there are quite a lot. So yeah, it's very easy to copy these over into your n8n instance and have them ready for you. Whatever you might be working on, there's probably a workflow example that you can pick from. Now there's over 6,300. All right, let's go back to here and see what's happening. Let's update the tool. Okay, so I kind of want to see what it's doing. Okay, let's put this in here. What I have down here is the dev server running locally for this application. And if I stop this real quick, you just hit npm run dev for next JS projects, and it'll kick it off. So if I see here, we're on a local host, which means we're serving this application from this server that I just started down here. And let's see if this has made any updates to this interface yet. Can't find the file. Let's just get at that. All right. No, it has not. It's still working. So we're going to see some issues happening. This turned out to be a little bit more complex than I think I originally intended it to be. So let's continue on with this flow and functionality rather than stopping this session. The other thing I was showing you guys last time was how to make sure you're branching and versioning all your code. So you can see here, these are all the changes that have been made. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a quick commit of the changes so far. So we captured them, let it run this. If you don't know Microsoft Visual Studio Code, this is just using Microsoft's Copilot, which is their version of the coding agent. So you can see here, you can run Copilot here in a sidebar as well, but I've experimented with it quite a bit. It's still not quite as satisfactory and as good as Claude Code. So I no longer use it, but it will create all these commit and pull request messages for you so that you don't have to manually write all of those out. We just need to have it create the plan document. If you aren't familiar with the code and the JSON stuff here, I know it might seem overwhelming, but I actually would encourage you to just keep pressing on, right? Because for the most part, the LLM will know how to structure this data and the code to work with the data. And that's why we start with the PRD, because this planning document really will help you to have the macro view of what's being worked on. And as you get down and you run into bugs, and you will run into bugs, this document can always be referred back to, right? And so right now we're just letting it build, hoping to test certain things during that process, which, depending on the size of that functionality, I typically will break it up into chunks and test before we move on, so that it's not a cascading set of failures, right? But as the AI, as Claude Code is working, just let it keep going, because it will do a pretty good job, right? Like you might be 80, 95% of the way there. And as you're testing functionality in the web browser and seeing how things work, that's where you can refer back to this PRD and let it understand where it went wrong and then fix the issues that it runs into. All right, let's see where we are. The implementation is complete. Did I miss something? I missed my instructions for some reason. That's surprising. It typically doesn't do that. All right, maybe I will check on something real quick and kick off the next workflow, which is a daily reminder app. It won't know what the goal tracking app is because it doesn't have all the payload information and the other data. But let's see if we can run this data book. Trigger onto webhook. The workflow, okay. Use a settings node. Cool. Beginning. Okay, let's see how it does, what it does with that. So you can see it's kind of funny what it did. This is what happens when you give the AI, or you don't give the AI any sort of context into what it's building. This is actually a very funny example. All right, we won't try that again because it needs the actual background and context. So let's continue with this build here. It's gonna update the local variables information. This is the configuration for our Supabase project. Now it just added that. Okay. Let's move this towards the bottom. So this is just like for if you're on the Windows machine, this is a run dev command that's a little bit more than what I showed you guys earlier, where it'll remove all the previous cache. so I can have a completely clean local dev that has no cache attached to it. If you aren't aware of what a env file or an environment file is, this .local file will not go up onto GitHub. It will not be public, but this file here, which is the env example file, will be public because this is what you should create in your own instance of this GitHub repository if you were to make a copy of it, so that you can copy this and then actually fill it in with your variables. I know that I'm showing you guys revealing the Supabase data information, but it's okay because there's nothing really vital on that Supabase database. So it's trying to run the dev server. I typically run the dev server on my own because I want to see the data that, or the information that it's as the app is being interacted with, so I can see the data, right? So you guys can see here, if I load the page, now you will see what the code base is doing, right? So this is information that you will want to see as you're working with the app, testing the app, things like that. We're going to go for another like 10-15 minutes, and let's see how far Claude Code can get with our implementation plan. Let's open this up. All right, so it's gotten to about here. The AI typically adds these time limits, but they're usually a fraction of what it actually takes, right? The most time you're going to spend when you're building apps with Claude Code and other code-based tools like this, guys, is the testing and the fine-tuning and the polishing things that need to happen. The bulk of the build is quite fast, actually, but you will spend probably 80%, 70% of your time testing the app and making sure it is aligned with what the PRD and the original project task or vision was. So let's see where it's gone. Okay, phase 2 complete, dashboard integration. All right, so now we should start to see some updates here. It's causing an error because it's still updating the code. Hold on, I gotta stop the dev server. So when a build command is running, what it's doing is a lot of checks, right? TypeScript checks and other checks to make sure that when you deploy this application, it's actually going to run on the server. So this is one of the nice things that's built into working with a framework like Next.js is these code-based checks are built in and automatic. Kind of different from if you were doing a Python app where you have to manually do all of those checking. But here, the framework itself is doing all that work for you. When it's doing a build, you can't have the dev server running, but you're going to have to manually restart it anyways. You can see here, we had some missing components, UI components that it added in the code base. So like buttons, cards, it added the code, but those actual components from ShadCM were not there. So it recognized that those pieces were missing and is auto installing for me and making sure that the code base will work when we actually deploy it to the server. So let's update this. Let's see if we can actually get this on the live server running so that I can call the workflow. We want to see the actual goal suggestions come back. All right, this is active. If I go here, I need to create a pull request to merge our changes into the main branch on GitHub. Make sure I commit this. All right, so let's wait for this to upload. Okay, I'm gonna create a pull request. And you guys can see here, the branch I'm working on is called October 16. And I want to bring that code into the main branch because the main branch is what's going to be actually on the Vercel servers. And you can see here, because I made a commitment of code, it's going to run a preview deployment, but we won't care about the preview because we need the actual main branch live. I'm going to use Copilot again to create a summary for this pull request. And you can see here we have 5 different commits that we're merging into the main branch. Create a pull request. And when the pull request is created, it's going to do some checking. Yeah, so the deployment failed. If we merge this, the main branch or the production deployment will fail as well. Let's have Claude address those for me. So this is pretty standard when you're going to deploy to GitHub to Vercel. Not all your deployments will be successful, and when they fail, I typically just take these error codes back into Claude Code so that you can just have the AI address them for me and make sure that it's paired and built properly. We'll just continue to work through those. Okay, after spending some time fixing those deployment errors and build errors that we saw right before this, we did have a successful deployment to our live URL, which you can see here, which is usc-f1f.vercel.app. And if you come here, you can sign up and actually interact with this. I am already signed in. So what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and trigger the workflow that we just built. And so you can see here in this interface, it added this button. And if I click this and I go into n8n, I should now see an execution. You can see here that it started this execution after I hit that button. So let it keep thinking. Shouldn't take too long. And as you can see, this takes maybe 30 seconds or so, and I will be right back. Okay, so it did take about the same amount of time, 34 seconds. It went through all of these steps in the workflow. And if I go into the web interface, you guys can see here now that we do have 5 suggestions. And remember, we set the number of suggestions to 5, and that's why we're seeing 5 here in this interface. We can change that as we wish. And so this read the existing goals and suggested some new ones based on that, which is pretty cool. So, we have our milestones, right? And the dates, number of days, et cetera, et cetera. So if I click here, I'll hit add to my goals. And what you can see down here is now it's added here. Obviously, we don't have these cards updated to show the milestones and things of that nature, but it did update the card here to include the target date. So pretty cool to see this working. Overall, how easy it was to get this set up. You can see here, we now have a complete interaction with the Next.js app, as well as an n8n workflow, which has an AI agent creating these goals for us. And then we'll continue to build the next workflow, which should be simpler, which is just a reminder workflow. Or maybe we just build that reminder functionality and implement our email sending tool, which is called Resend. Actually, I think that might be a better use of our time for next time. And if you have something you want to see for next time, just let me know. And then I think I also showed you guys that this repository is made public, so you guys can see it here. I just added it to the message on this call. So if you guys want to capture what's there so far, it's not there yet. But the other thing I will add to that GitHub repository is the JSON for this workflow. And if we do create another workflow, I'll make sure that that JSON is included. And we'll add that to we'll add a workflows folder. Yeah, so I'll add that into this folder, and so that you guys can have this as an example available for our next call. Again, the next call is on Thursday. Yeah, thanks for joining today. I think I'm just going to do some cleanup and spend a little bit more time making sure that this thing is going to connect properly, but you guys don't need to sit there and watch that for today. Thanks, guys, for joining. Carson, thanks for joining as well.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Alex. And I just want to make sure if you can send over the recordings after each one so that those who are behind, and we can send it out to everyone as well who weren't able to attend, that'd be great for last session as well.
Yeah, I just haven't had time to edit them. I'm going to create them as a Descript URL. And so I'll send those out, and I actually been adding them to our Google Doc, Carson. So I'll add those and let you guys know when they are there. Okay.
We can see the visuals as well through Descript, follow along visually.
Yeah, so it'll have the entire transcript and the full video as well.
Amazing, perfect. Yeah, and then with some notes for in between thoughts and homework to think about, so that we can send it out and synthesize it and send it out to our mailing list and everything.
Sounds good.
Amazing.
Right,
thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you on Thursday. Take care.
Right.
Bye-bye.